Well, the NFL world all in Indianapolis right now. NFL Combine underway. We're inching closer to the new league year, and the Buffalo Bills need to start freeing up some cap space. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to Buffalo End Zone Podcast, everyone. Jon Scott on vacation this week. Joining me right now is our coworker, Dan Russell, who is a meteorologist by trade. And
yes,
Dan, we can get into the weather because we're experiencing it all today as we record this on a Wednesday. Dan, also a head football coach at Lakeshore High School in Western New York, just south of Buffalo. And he is maybe the first big fan I ever ran into that looks forward to watching the Combine with an eagle eye to see how everything is going. Dan's big into fitness. He's finished an Ironman. He's run marathons. He's big into everything that goes on when evaluating football players at any level, be it high school, college, or into the pros. It's something Dan enjoys doing. So we started talking about the Combine in the newsroom, and I said, what the heck?
Yeah.
Let's bring it to the podcast, Dan. We got a lot to get to, but let's jump off with a little bit about you and what interests you so much about sitting there, what people refer to as the Underwear Olympics sometimes.
Yeah, we've all heard that term, the Underwear Olympics.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's more than just your testing numbers. It's a job interview. And for many of these guys, you know, I played college football. I had a career-ending knee injury that ultimately ended my football career. But I remember when I was younger, and my son is going through this as well, he has those dreams and those aspirations of playing in college, playing at the next level. And really, this is the job interview that's going to translate to these guys making their dreams come true. You know, and these are really, they're kids out there, right? They're young men. And this is their moment to shine, to show that they belong in the NFL. And I love that aspect of it, that, you know, when I see that 21-year-old, 6'5", 275-pound defensive end, at one point that was a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, on a youth football team, dreaming of playing football. And then here's his chance to show NFL coaches, scouts, GMs, what kind of athlete he is and what kind of person he is. And I kind of look at it that way.
You have your big-name players that you know are going to go in the draft, but some of these lower-level players, like you mentioned, this is their time to shine. This is their time to say, you know, I think you and I started this whole thing talking about Mike Mamula from the Buffalo area, who was one of the first guys out of Boston College to actually prepare for the Combine specifically to impress, and was, I think, labeled at the time in the 90s the champ of the NFL Combine. Ended up, his draft stock moved up. He was drafted 7th overall by the Eagles. Yep.
You get the all-stars, if you will. And, you know, and I love how they're even opening it up even more to your D2, your D3 athletes as well, and giving them almost a Cinderella opportunity to show their stuff, and, you know, alongside those D1 athletes.
Bit of business to get to with the Bills because, of course, like every year, as the Combine gets underway, you hear from head coaches, you hear from general managers. We heard from Brandon Beane. We heard from Sean McDermott. The big focus with McDermott right now is we're hearing from him the first time since the salary cap adjustment came out at $255 million, which brought a smile to his face, with the Bills still in salary cap trouble, but just that much better. So far, one deal restructured in lineman Connor McGovern, but we expect more to come.
Yeah, I would imagine we're going to see a lot more moves. I think Brandon Beane even mentioned that in his interview yesterday, that they're going to start even more so this week, but definitely next week and right up to the league year.
So as we record on a Wednesday, things are just going to start unfolding. And like I tell everyone every year after the Super Bowl, you think the NFL's over. It's kind of over, but it picks up pretty quick. One of the other things that's going to start coming up as we get to the league year is the Bills, and I didn't expect Brandon Beane to say anything different, would love to retain all of his free agents. They have 22 at this point. It's just not realistic. But that's GM speak for you.
Well, we saw that with Tremaine Edmonds last year. You know, they would have loved to have kept him. They invested in him, a first-round draft pick. But ultimately, you know, he played his way into a bigger contract and had a great season with the Bears, and it allowed one of Brandon Beane's draft picks that not a lot of people gave a lot of chance, but, Terrell Bernard came in there and really showed he belonged.
Bernard was the shocker of the year, Dan. I got to be honest.
Yeah, right?
It's on the offensive side of the ball. I think this was the focus at the end of the season. Both Brandon Beane and McDermott brought this up about having more explosive plays on offense, be it bigger plays down the field, be it a receiver or running back who can catch the ball and then gain that extra 40 to 50 yards down the field. And me, Jon Scott, and I have talked about this already. I'm split when it comes to the wide receiver spot because I'd love to see you do both. Bring in a veteran free agent as like a fail-safe, like if everything goes wrong, but do everything it takes to go up and get a wide receiver. And we're going to see the numbers and everything later on in the week from the wide receivers, and we'll get to some of the top guys a little bit later on.
They're going to need wide receivers just because from a numbers standpoint, and I would expect and I would hope, I know much of Western New York is on that wide receiver train, especially with more than likely Gabe Davis also being kind of in that Terrell Edmonds boat where kind of playing himself into a bigger contract that the Bills just can't afford. And I love it that it's going to give more opportunity to a Khalil Shakir. But also, I think this is they're finally going to invest in a higher round draft pick at the wide receiver position and speed. That's my number one thing. I would love speed and size, but I think speed is something that the Bills could definitely use more of.
So as far as the draft goes, this is where we're at right now. And this is the launching point of our conversation that really got me into, you know what? Okay, Dan might be, as a head coach of a high school football team, on the same page as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills, Sean McDermott, who during his press availability mentioned something you had mentioned to me days before. And when I heard it, I was like, oh, I never thought of that. And we're talking body language of players you can see while the NFL Network is showing what's going on, while they're not doing the drills or after the drills or when they're in the huddle during position drills with coaches from around the NFL and just overall body language from, like you said, these kids in this job interview that are trying to get to the next level. Some of them are going there. Some of them need to do something. Some of them, you could be Marvin Harrison Jr. and be like, whatever. But there are other people or players out there that really have to have their head in the game, and that's something that you really pay attention to while watching these combine drills.
I think you're getting a bit of a picture or a glimpse into what kind of human you're drafting, not only the athlete, but the kind of human being you're getting. For example, when the quarterbacks are out there, when a quarterback makes one of those wow throws, when Josh Allen threw that 180-yard, bomb, and you heard that gasp. What did the other quarterbacks do? Did they put their head down being like, oh, man? Or did they appreciate that moment? And, that's just one example. Are they cheering each other on, pushing each other through especially the field drills? Or are they on the sideline? Are they over by themselves, with their headphones on and kind of in their own world? All of this are just kind of little nuggets that tell you what kind of person that is, because they are going to be in a locker room with 90-plus other guys during training camp. They got to be able to work along and get along with the other individuals. If I'm a coach, for example, and I'm putting my these players through the field drills, is that player making eye contact with me? For a lot of these field drills, they might be doing them for the first time. So are they taking coaching? Are they following along? Sometimes they'll go through these drills multiple times. Are they getting better each drill? That's what a coach would be looking for, because are they coachable? Can I take an athlete and then make him the best individual, the best football player he can be? Can I help him get there? Well, is he going to help me out in doing that as well? And so those are the things that nobody really talks about, at the combine. But I'm sure the coaches, the scouts, the GMs, they're all well aware of that. And it's something I truly appreciate as well.
Yeah, and you hear that from Coach McDermott and Brandon Beane often of a Bills culture. Are they a fit for the Buffalo Bills, not just as a player, but personality-wise? And every team says it, But I think being in Western New York and following the Bills, I think we both have a pretty good idea of what the Bills' culture is and what they're looking for as far as players and human beings go.
Culture is huge, especially I'm a coach, so I'm a little biased there. But you got to remember, and I mentioned this even to my players, but it holds true even in the NFL. When it comes to the actual amount of, like, we see them on game day. That's 3 hours on a Sunday. They're with each other Monday. They're with each other Tuesday. They're with each other Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They're staying in hotel rooms with each other. They pretty much are living with each other. So you want to make sure you have a group of individuals that can work together, that can be around each other, that can push each other to ultimately try to achieve your goals.
And that's the process. And the process has these drills, Dan, that you and I will go through. I think the average person who's a football fan will say, well, the 40-yard dash shows how fast someone is, and the bench press shows how strong you are, and that's maybe the vertical people pay attention to as well. A lot more to it than just the 40-yard dash being, well, how fast are the wide receivers? Because it's not just how fast the wide receivers are.
Yeah, well, we were mentioning this a little bit earlier, how linemen, why are they running a 40-yard dash? Because ultimately, offensive line.
To get downfield and block later on.
Yeah, right? But what is key there is that 10-yard, time. Because the offensive linemen, they normally start in a 3-point stance. Well, in a 40-yard dash, you're starting in a down stance. Now, it's more of a sprinter stance than a traditional football stance. But still, how is that individual getting out of that stance and getting through those first 3, 4, 5 steps, which is roughly 10 yards. Well, that is what an offensive line certainly does on every single given play, is firing out of their stance. And are they slow out of their stance? Well, ultimately, that means they probably can't play tackle because they don't have the speed to recover for a defensive end. Are they, are they getting really fast out of their stance? And now we know what kind of athlete we have, regardless of what his end 40 time is. Again, that 10-yard though time is huge for an offensive lineman, for example.
And it's still big for the skill positions.
And it's still
and
big
the quarterbacks and whatever. The 20-yard shuttle, I think, is something a lot of people see. The back and forth. That's another viewed one. But I think other than agility, I think there's a little bit more to what we're looking for and trying to get out of it.
Yeah, it's 20-yard shuttles are great for wide receivers because it's change of direction position. So you have your wide receivers, your running backs, but also your linebackers. It's a good one for linebackers because they are always shifting, especially from side to side on that football field as they're reading the play. Well, 20-yard shuttle, they're running one direction. They got to sink their hips. They got to gather themselves and then accelerate out of that. So you got to decelerate, accelerate out of that. That's just like on a playing field when a linebacker maybe makes a misread, he overruns one way, and now he's got to sink his hips and then accelerate out of that to get back the other direction if there's a counter or something like that that's going the other direction.
There's a lot to look at, and this one we talked about before the podcast started that I had never heard of. Like you, I played college football as well. 60-yard shuttle, which is the 20-yard shuttle, but 60 yards, which seems exhausting.
I would say that's more of an endurance test, and I think there's a reason why a lot of the players end up opting out of that particular test.
Yeah. 3-cone drill, I've always viewed almost the same way as the 20-yard shuttle. Am I wrong in this?
It's
because I've always kind of been like,
It's similar. It is similar, but a 3-cone is great for especially something like a defensive end. When they have to turn that corner, are they getting low around that? Are they sinking their hips? Are they dropping their shoulder around that cone? When they're coming around the end cone, that's not as important, but really it's that initial turn. Are they keeping it nice and tight, or are they going out wide? You don't want a defensive end, for example, going out wide. And there's some historical reference to the 3-cone on defensive ends' success in the NFL, and you'll see a lot of times, like J.J. Watt, for example, especially at his side, he had an amazing 3-cone drill. There's more examples through the years where that is actually a test that correlates nicely to NFL success, especially for the defensive end position.
Vertical jump, I think, is self-explanatory. I'm going to skip it unless there's something you think. I just think the vertical jump is the vertical jump. The one that I was looking at was the broad jump.
Yes.
Which I find interesting now after looking a little bit into, we all know as kids, you do the jump thing. You're at a standstill, you jump, you see how far you can go. And some of the reading I was doing on it to talk to you to get a little more informed because honest to God, give me the numbers after the combine. Let's get ready for the draft. Sure. We'll get to what I might actually tune into in a bit. It involves position drills. But the broad jump, I believe I read that actually, among other things, has to do with, I think I read defensive linemen about the legs and what they're getting from how they can jump from a standstill position on what their legs will do while trying to rush.
Yeah, even for an offensive lineman, because that is when you're doing that broad jump and you're sinking your hips and you're getting low. Well, ultimately you're getting yourself in a low position, just like a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman. Now, not in pass blocking for an offensive lineman, but this is a good run blocking scenario where you're firing out of your stance. And if you can explode out of that with some distance at 320 pounds, that's a lot. That's just simple physics,
right?
Yeah, I mean that's mass times acceleration right there, and that's what we're looking for. And it not only shows that kind of explosivity, especially out of your stance, but also what kind of athlete you are. I remember watching Josh Allen, do his broad jump, and I remember it was right in line with fairly close to what Cam Newton did.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, Cam Newton was one of the highest broad jumps that was ever recorded, at the combine. And now we started seeing what kind of truly athlete Josh Allen was when his numbers started matching up with somebody like Cam Newton.
That's pretty incredible. Bench press.
Yep.
I mean, when you think of bench press, who was it? Tony Mandrich? Am I getting that right?
There's been a couple of big ones, and his name slips my mind. The big offensive lineman for the Cowboys, Larry Allen.
Okay.
I think he did something like 50, 51 reps, some crazy number, and obviously you got to have strength.
Yeah.
The game of football is still a man versus man. I'm trying to impose my will on you game. And obviously strength is a big part of that. So I think when it comes to the strength numbers, it's really not as important as far as how much you do. I think it's more or less, do you reach a benchmark? Does an offensive lineman hit 20 reps? Because if they don't, and they've been in college, I have players that move on to college and play football, and they can bench 225 for a certain number of reps. Now, when you see an offensive lineman, and for example, and they only get, say, 12 reps of 225, well, now it's not just are they strong enough, but why aren't they strong enough? They've been in this college program. They've been in a lifting program for 3-4+ years. Why have they not gotten stronger? So that's where we hear about those red flags. That's a red flag, not necessarily because of the strength, but why is that strength not there? So that's some of the, the outside of the lines kind of things.
Kids, if you're out there trying to get to the next level, pay attention to Dan because I was exactly what you're describing in college. Yep. I had no desire to do anything with the lifting program. You had to drag me there. I was fine with speed and being able to catch a football and didn't do anything else. And then, the career just ends eventually, Dan. You run out of opportunities when you have that kind of mentality. But, of course, I wanted to stay in sports. So here I am right now doing this. So I'm good.
Yep.
I'm fine with it.
Oh, good. I actually run our lifting program at our school, and I love it. It's called our Iron Eagle program, and that's what it's about, not only getting stronger, but also becoming a better athlete. And we do a lot of training, whether it's plyometrics, which is jump training, training that explosivity. Obviously, we train strength, bench press, and all that, but we do a lot when it comes to explosive movement, functional strength with power cleans, all that kind of good stuff.
Ironically, due to an error, I was given an award for the one player on the team that attended the lifting program every day, which my buddies who were captains of the team tried to get taken away from me. But I'm like, it's all I got right now. Come on, guys. Position drills, Dan, that's where I think a lot of people who will just casually flip on the combine workouts, look for your quarterbacks, your wide receivers, your defensive backs, even your linebackers. That's where most eyes start to go to. You can get the times and everything else there, but you kind of actually do want to see if X wide receiver from here that I've heard everyone talking about, if he's out there dropping the ball all the time, that's a cause of concern right there. If, you say or they say throwing a ball against air when it's just the quarterbacks throwing deep. But still, you can garner some information off of seeing some of that. And I think that's where I fall into more of the category of this is where I will tune in right now to see the actual skill sets.
Hey, well, we talked about Josh Allen. I remember him going through the throwing drills. And, and you'll hear about this during the broadcast as well, where they're not as much into whether or not the ball is completed because these quarterbacks are working with this wide receiver for the very first time. But they're looking, does he make it look easy? Is he getting through his steps? Is he staying balanced? Is his throwing motion looking consistent? That's the kind of things they're looking for. And then all the off-field stuff that I kind of already mentioned. Are they taking coaching? Are they understanding what's expected? And for a lot of the defensive drills, you're trying to make it as game relevant without pads as possible. So you're seeing their movements. Are they fluid? Are they making it look easy? That's when you see somebody fighting out there and it's either jittery and, they're just not smooth. That will come out in a football drill and ultimately will come out in a game field, So those are some of the other things to look for during those football drills. Are they making it look easy? Is this something they've been doing for the last 10 years or is this something that is brand new to them and they're struggling? Are they maintaining balance? For an offensive lineman, if you're continually falling down or losing your balance in some of these drills, which you'll see, like even when they're backpedaling, why is an offensive lineman backpedaling? Well, we want to see what kind of balance he has. And for a lot of bigger guys, balance can be an issue because they are big. They are carrying a lot more weight. So are they looking balanced? Because obviously, if they're not balanced, they're either falling down or the defensive lineman is taking advantage of that offensive lineman not being balanced.
Of course, if you talk to GMs, interviews, big, medical, huge with what they're trying to accomplish out in Indianapolis with some of these players, healthy guy interview big, but the medical with some of these guys who dealt with injuries, who project high, but you still got to do your due diligence in checking in on them.
These are investments. These teams are investing potentially millions of dollars into these individuals, so they're trying to figure out every little bit of knowledge they can, because if you're not on the field, you're not helping out the team, and regardless of your playing ability or just if you're injured, and consistently getting injured, you're not helping out the team.
One of the things that I came across, and I don't have the website here handy right now, was that the Wonderlic test, I think it was last year, they kind of moved on from it. Of course, you hear about Wonderlic numbers, or you heard about them up until this point on, well, he's got all the talent, but his Wonderlic score was this. I think Josh Allen was the top score is 50. I think Josh Allen was around 37 or something like that. I took a mock one once as a gag. I got a 21 on it, which to me, like some of it, you get frustrated. You're reading it, and it's all about how your brain processes things. Some of it just gets obnoxious after a while.
Well, it's timed. And if to be honest, one of the reasons why they probably did get rid of it is I think the one position that I think it does kind of hold some truth towards and helps in understanding what their ability is, especially mentally, is the quarterback position. But I think that might be the only position out there because the quarterback position is really an extension of a coach out there. They got to know what that individual's doing, what that guy's doing, what the offensive guard's doing, what the wide receivers do. They got to know everybody's doing out there, whereas if you are an offensive guard, I just need to know what my job is for the most part. And so whereas Wonderlic, I don't quite need to, process information, but I still think, I think it was a valuable tool for quarterbacks. So what's happening now is what you're seeing in these meetings, and you kind of see it in some of those specialty shows that they have where they're, whether it was Mooch, Steve, Mariucci, and that quarterback show he had, where he'll mention a play. He'll move on to something, and this is pretty much the modern day equivalent of a Wonderlic.
Right.
So he'll mention a play call, and he'll go over it. They'll get into the conversation, and then 5 minutes later, you go, all right, please recall that play for me, it's mental processing. And as a quarterback, you got to do things like that. And especially in today's NFL, they're bigger, faster, stronger. You got to process information, before it even happens.
I would assume maybe the play caller on defense needs a little bit of that. And even
safeties.
Yeah, and even wide receivers with reading routes and defenses and whatnot. But, yeah, I was shocked to see that they weren't doing it anymore. I mean, like I said earlier, quite frankly, looking at what it actually was a lot of that. Here's a bunch of – here's like 10 squares, but how many squares are in the square? And it was just kind of obnoxious. So about the Bills, I think, as you mentioned off the top, that wide receiver train in Western New York is chugging along pretty well. A lot of people are on it, including myself. I am open to other positions now as this process moves along, but you got some of the top receivers there, and I would like them to make a move to get one. And we know what happened with Dalton Kincaid last year. Good rookie season for Dalton Kincaid, but I think the promise that was made wasn't really lived up to from what people were actually expecting. And so now I think the push to get someone opposite Stephon Diggs who could possibly grow into someone who takes over for Stephon Diggs. There's names on here on the top 5, Dan, that, we can get to, but the Bills aren't getting to them. Marvin Harrison Jr. already saying he's not taking part in it out of Ohio State. That's kind of expected.
Yeah,
I'm one of those guys that I don't have a problem if all that's going to happen is your draft stock might go down. I don't see the need in some of this.
He's already a guaranteed top 3 pick, So although I would love, and again, it tells about who the individual is. And we were mentioning this story a few days ago. I'll never forget, and again, because of the individual this person was the Calvin Johnson was in his combine was not going to run the 40-yard dash. He wasn't going to do anything. And he's there, obviously, because for the team interviews and the medicals and that they do with all the individuals. And he's hanging out, and he's like, you know what? Let's do this. And he didn't even bring his cleats. He had to borrow somebody's cleats. And here he is, 6'5", 225 or so, this big guy. And he crushes a 4.3 40-yard dash. That just right there. It was just – and he didn't even have to. So I do respect that and love that. But obviously Marvin Harrison also has quite the corner behind him, giving him great advice as well on what to do and what not to do.
So some of the names a little bit further down, you hear Troy Franklin, Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. These are some of the things that are starting to pop up, but it's still the Bills might need to move up to get some of these guys that are way up there. Let's be realistic, Dan. Who you could see. I get stuck on one thing, and then I start looking up one player over and over again to convince myself
it's going to be that guy.
Right, and I'm sitting there at Troy Franklin. Like I'm sitting there at, depending on how things fall, if he's around near where you are to go get him. I don't know if you have anyone in mind yourself, but
you just mentioned 2 of the guys, and I think between McDermott and Bean's comments the past couple of days talking about explosive plays, whether it's down the field or even in the in the short yardage, but then turning it into something, what do you need? You need speed. So I think they are going to be looking at, and which is obviously something that I think this team needs because as much as I love Steph Diggs, he's getting up there in age. He doesn't quite have that true downfield speed. And even Gabe Davis really didn't have true downfield speed that we see some other wide receivers across the league have. So I would love somebody with a little bit of size. You don't have to be 6'3", 6'4", but 6', 6'1" at least, that has at least 4.4 speed and can be that guy that can groom into that outside, that X or Z wide receiver, which are your outside wide receivers that can groom into that can ultimately take over for Steph Diggs.
Defensive tackle is the other position of need for the Bills, and I almost talked myself off a wide receiver in the first. But I'm wide receiver heavy anyways because of my past that I'm looking at that. So if you're looking at defensive tackle somewhere down the line, and we have the list here, but Darius Robinson, who can move around, who has played tackle and out on the edge. He's played inside and outside. To me, that just reeks of what Sean McDermott likes on his defense, is the ability to do that. I mean, there are bigger names ahead of him.
The positionless player, right, as they call it. The positionless player where he can play anywhere.
Right. He's out of Missouri. He just, in going through all the bigger names, I'm like, who's someone who's up there but not way up there that you might want to keep an eye on during the combine and see what kind of numbers they're putting up, and maybe they even move up some lists,
I think for the Bills, a lot will happen in free agency.
Yeah.
I think that the one position that we have our 3 technique, which is that's your upfield pass rushing DT. Rarely do you have 2 pass rushing DTs. So what you have traditionally, especially in a 4-3 defense, is you have your 3 technique, which is your pass rushing DT. Ed Oliver, he proved he is one of the best. Right. He really is one of the best in the league. We have him under contract. That's great. But what we need is that the guy that can eat up the multiple blocks there in the middle, the center, especially with the smaller linebackers that we have. And we saw that when Daquan Jones, when he went out this year, the defense it was a learning curve. How do we adjust to not having that one, nose tackle that can really hold a point in front of these linebackers? And then when he came back later in the season, how drastically improved the defense became like that. So if he moves on in free agency, that's a huge position of need, I think. Is not necessarily that athletic DT, but that DT that can truly hold the ground. So that's where I'm really high on that T'Vondre Sweat. He's the big he won't be high. He won't be a first rounder, but he'll probably end up being a second or third rounder because there's only so many big guys, and he's 6'4", 360 plus. Right. He tore it up at the Senior Bowl. I mean, he was immovable in one-on-one drills, 2-on-1 drills. He took a couple of the top centers in this draft, literally jacked him up, folded him over himself to get to the – I mean, so he's somebody that I would love. Especially if Daquan Jones were somebody that we are not be able to resign, we're going to have to get that big space-eating DT, and he's somebody that maybe that second-round area that we could go for.
I'm down with that. I can be convinced of that.
And there's only so many. There really is only a couple of 2, 3, 4 guys that are like this that have that kind of size and production at the college level in this entire draft. So he's somebody I would keep an eye out for.
Any other position of need jump off the books to you to keep an eye on? I'm leaning towards safety just because of the uncertainty with Micah Hyde, the uncertainty with Jordan Poyer. He's even, I think you and I might have talked about this during the season that he was a step slower this year. And that's expected to happen, that maybe now's the time to really get younger at the safety position without, blowing everything up all at once.
Absolutely. So safety, I'm on board with that as well, taking a look. Now, what's interesting with the safety position, if you remember, both Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer were cornerbacks. They played cornerback in college that transitioned to safety. So that might be something where maybe they do go a cornerback that could ultimately develop into a safety down the line. Another position, though, I'm not for a starter, more or less, but something that we haven't seen here as of late, which would be maybe more of a developmental quarterback prospect, for example, in the later rounds. I'm kind of intrigued by that. I know that, and his name slips my mind, but the quarterback from Georgia there that the Giants then stole. But that was like
Jake.
So that was like a develop. I wouldn't be surprised if around there they go with maybe the quarterback there from Notre Dame, for example.
Okay.
Somebody that has success at the collegiate level that can ultimately learn the game and grow. So I would like to see a developmental quarterback, and then also a big running back, to pair alongside James Cook. There's only a few big guys out there in this year's draft, but those are some of, again, not necessarily starters, but, somewhere it'll provide storyline and intrigue moving forward.
Combine, the drills are starting up, I believe, Thursday through Sunday.
Yep.
You're not going to get your wide receivers until Saturday. But D tackles, I believe, are going off Thursday.
Traditionally, they've always done the offensive skill positions first, and they finished with defense. Now they've kind of reversed that.
Want to get viewers on the weekend, Dan.
Yes, that's it.
Of course, Dan is a meteorologist by trade as well as a head football coach. So I'd be remiss, and I bring this up only because back in October, you and I were talking, and you were like, got to be honest with you, the way things are looking, we're going to have a mild winter for the most part. There'll be some times where you're going to get your winter weather, but you're right on the mark for the first time. Today, as we record this, you get the old 4 seasons in one day, starting in the 60s and then just tapering off, and the evening commute will be in the snow. But I was amazed, at this point, with how dead on that was. So I'm putting this on you right now.
Yep, I know, it's coming.
For Bills fans out there who are going to be going to games.
Yep.
What this fall going into winter you think is going to be like as far as the weather goes? Because even it's one of the things that gets tweeted out the most is your game day forecast.
It does.
Every
it does.
TV station, everywhere, everyone wants to know the game day forecast. We'll just do the season as a whole forecast since we don't know the schedule or anything.
Hey, well, I'll get a little bit into the science of it, and when we take a look at these seasonal forecasts, we look at what are called teleconnections, which these are, in other words, large-scale features, phenomena that we can actually measure real time. And, for example, this winter, we knew we had what was called an El Nino, and a very strong El Nino at that, which is where the surface water temperatures along the equatorial Pacific are so south. Think of it, south of Hawaii.
Okay.
All right, west of South America. That's. So what are those surface water temperatures doing?
Yeah.
They were well above average. They were warm. Well, when we traditionally see that kind of setup, we usually end up with a warmer winter. Now, there's obviously other factors that go into it as well, but that's one that we can at least get an idea of what to expect. What we see and what we foresee going into summer and next winter is a complete reversal, where we're going to go from the strong El Nino to what is called a La Nina, which means below average surface water temperatures in that same region. We actually had a La Nina last winter, which ultimately, many of the months finished with above average temperatures. But we also had some bouts of some very cold weather and, of course, epic snowstorms between the Christmas blizzard and also the big lake effect event during the month of November. So if I was to put a forecast out there, and I know it's early and this is going to seem a lot like, he's flipping a coin or, he's giving it a 50-50 chance.
I'm going to keep this down in the books.
Right. So with a La Nina developing, I do expect a fall of extremes.
Oh.
And so whether it's warm, it could be a warm extreme, but it could also be a cold extreme. So a lot of variability in our weather starting in the fall and then continuing more likely into winter.
Detroit, get ready.
Yeah.
That's what I say. It's amazing looking at the Bills' schedule, how many road games are in domes anyways. So Bills will be playing, other than, their home games and in the AFC East, it looks like almost all dome games. John and I always do a 3 and out before we head out, Dan, and this one's a little more Bills specific than normal, just because there's some side stories that have popped up this week involving the Buffalo Bills, including Deion Dawkins in an interview on Vlad TV on his hatred of the New York Jets and how, looking at it, they're all basically calling them out, saying, you're all just playing football because it's cool. So obviously there's pushback from the Jets. Any boil over there's got to be going into next season, especially with the AFC East rival with Deion. I think Sauce Gardner already called him out.
What we call bulletin board material, right? And these players are all athletes. They're all exceptional athletes, the best in the world. You want every little bit of nugget, especially from a coaching standpoint. I've known coaches in the past that have made things up to provide bullet board material. Players didn't even know it, but they've made things up just to, again, any kind of incentive, anything that could motivate somebody just to give it a little bit more, just to fight that much more for that success.
Yeah, I'm fine with Dawkins doing it. I don't
Sure,
see a problem in
absolutely.
it. Mix it up. The more, the merrier. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, Damar Hamlin at an event in the Pittsburgh area, when asked, and he's from the area and played college ball in the area, did say he'd like to eventually end up on the Steelers and retire as a Pittsburgh Steeler. To me, with everything that happened with Damar, but where things are now with how this season played out, I don't think that's going to sit well with the bulk of Bills Mafia. And B, it's probably more time for him to move on from the Bills anyways. And I don't think anyone anywhere on all levels of this situation would even have a problem with it.
Absolutely not. I mentioned it earlier in the podcast how it wasn't that long ago. These were 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds playing the game of football, and most of them loved the team where they grew up, you know, and obviously, I remember I grew up in Western New York, and when I was that, high school football player going into college, I loved the Buffalo Bills and would have loved to have played in that opportunity to play for the Bills. Any team obviously would have been amazing, but these were all young athletes at one point that develop as fans. I know, for example, Rob Gronkowski. He mentioned he was a Bills fan, growing up, and ultimately played for the Patriots, and then obviously a Hall of Fame career. So it's a rarity where these players. Now we would love as fans to think that these players they absolutely it's their favorite team, all of that. But that is a fairly rare thing when you get that player that grew up in that area, that loves that team, and then plays for. And there's something about Pittsburgh. There is something there where they seem to get a lot of those players, though, that grew up there. And Pennsylvania football in general, especially at the high school level, is definitely up there as far as nationally. So maybe they have more players that just come out of there that they have a better chance of hitting one of those. But hopefully here in Western New York, I think football's on the up as well. So maybe we'll get a couple of players down the line playing for the Bills.
Well, that's on your shoulders at this point, not mine. Dan, final question. Favorite football movie?
Yep.
We could do sports, but we're going to focus on football in general. One movie that I just loved when I was playing football in college was The Program.
It's a good one.
I haven't watched it in a while. I watched it recently. First of all, the format stinks these days because it's box like back in the day, but I still like it. It still holds up. It's a little extreme. It's a little bit much at times, but as a football movie goes with some of the football scenes, and I always love the aerial shots of the stadiums that they were able to do. That always sneaks in to my mind as my favorite football movie, but there are so many others out there.
Going to that movie real quick. I love the scene where they're at the after game dinner. Yeah. And they're with all the boosters and he's getting slipped cash.
Right.
That was a no-no back then. Now they're getting slipped Lamborghinis and everything with the NIL deals. It's 100% allowed.
So now this movie's outdated.
So it's kind of funny there, looking back at some of those Blue Chips was another one. That's more of a basketball movie, but same concept where that's now allowed. And maybe down the line we'll get into another podcast on how that has really changed the landscape of college football and high school football as well with the NIL deals. As far as favorite movie for myself, this is an easy one. To this day, and I'll admit to this, there's one movie that literally I've seen hundreds of times, and it still makes me cry. Tears running down my face. It was just on the other day and watching the last 20 minutes, and that's Rudy.
Yeah.
And there's something about it, and it's not necessarily just Notre Dame, but it's just the story. It connects with me in a way that I love the scene where the players are giving up their jersey. The message that sends. When he finally does see the field, who's the one guy that's not like telling coach, put me in, and begging and this and that? Rudy's not the one. It's his teammates that are begging.
And the crowd.
And the crowd, the begging. So, again, the storyline, and then his family's so happy for him. I even get goosebumps even talking about it because it really connects with me emotionally. And so Rudy is easily my favorite football movie.
It does get you when he's running on the field and says, "What do I do?" Like that is like I could see myself there. Like, okay, I'm in. What do I do now? I mean, there's other football movies out there. Me and my buddy, because this was more of a comedy, I can't remember what the movie's name is. It had Scott Bakula and Sinbad in it.
Oh, boy. Necessary Roughness.
Necessary Roughness.
Yes.
Still had its funny moments in it, so that's still enjoyable. You always got your Brian song from back in the day.
Yep.
My dad and I were talking, speaking of the Pittsburgh Steelers, do you remember the TV movie about Rocky Blyer?
I do not.
From back in the day. About him serving in Vietnam, getting injured. I always got him and Franco Harris mixed up, but I believe it's Rocky Blyer. Comes back, busts his butt to get on the Steelers, and it's more than just a football movie. But it was something I think from the early '80s about how Vietnam and how people handled it. So that movie, I haven't seen that movie since I was a kid, but I still remember a lot of it. And then I think you and I talked about Little Giants, which I still haven't seen.
Remember the Titans as always. That was so. If Rudy is one for me, Remember the Titans is like a close 1B-ish. I remember going with actually a bunch of my college football players. We went and saw that in the movie theater, and just again the way it connects with me, and going through 2 days at camp, and that's one of my favorite parts. Is I love our camp. I take 2 weeks off from doing the weather on TV because I'm on the football field for 8 hours. And I love like those 2 weeks on how we come together as a team. We come together as one instead of a bunch of individuals out there just playing a sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, thanks for jumping in on this
my
one.
pleasure.
With Jon on vacation, Jon will be back. Of course, there'll be Bills restructuring contracts. We'll start to get into the new league year over the next couple of weeks because we're going into February already. So mid-February is when the new league hits. So the Bills have a lot of work to do. Jon and I will be back with that next week. As always, everyone, thanks for jumping on and tuning in with us. We'll see you next week.